Now we'll be working on the windows and dormers, and in the cutting guide on the last page I've included a section for black cardstock and a section for pattern paper for the dormers and windows. And I'm using, for my window trim, I have 2 pieces of 6x6 with little spiders on it, and you'll need at least this amount, 6x12, to do the trim. And then I'm using a sheet of 6x6 that has kind of little words on it, and it's a tight fit to get it out of 6x6. We have to make a little adjustment, but it's not a problem, but it is a tight fit. So if you want to opt for something else so you don't have to worry about that, you can use a piece that's slightly bigger than 6x6, and then you won't have to be concerned about it at all. And the other reason is this paper that I've selected is directional, and so I can't turn pieces sideways in order to make them fit. So I will show you how I make the best use out of my pattern paper. But first I'll get my cardstock cut. So now I have all my black cardstock cut out, and I've labeled them with what section they go in, and I'm ready to start cutting pattern paper. And I'm going to start with the pattern paper that is the trim. Now each window, here's an example, has trim, and I'm using the little black spiders on the white background, and then the center paper I'm using the black paper with the lines on it. And there's a little black reveal of cardstock along that inside. So that's what we're going for here. So for the trim, I'm going to start by cutting a strip across one end that it's 1 3/8 inches wide, so I can cut the section 4 windows. There's 4 of those that are 1 3/8 by 1 3/8. So I'm going to cut those first. So I'm left with a piece of paper like this, and I'm going to cut a 2 1/8 inch high strip going the length of this, and then I can subcut it into 3 at 1 7/8, and that will give me my section 1 dormer and my section 1 inset dormer and one of my section 3 dormers. So I'll cut a 2 1/8 inch high strip going across, subcut it into 3 at 1 7/8. Now I'm left with a strip that is 6 inches long by 2.5 inches tall, and from that I can get my inset window for section 1 because it's 2 3/8 inches tall. I can get my last dormer for section 3, and then I can get section 5, that window that's there, that's 1 3/4 by 2 1/4. So I'll get those 3 cut out. So now I've used up my first piece, and I have my second piece, and I have these 4 pieces left to go, and I will cut them out, trying to keep them into one side of the paper because we'll still need some other paper. At least at this point I'm thinking I will use some other paper of this, or the remaining of this, for another purpose. If not, it's always best to conserve the biggest blocks of paper that you can. Now we have section 6 dormer, which is this big one. We have section 7, the bay window, and then the 2 circles that are down at the bottom of the list to cut. So I'll get those done. So I have all my trim cut out, and I have at least half of a 3x6 sheet left over, and I'll make sure I put a number to start with on each one of these so that if my paper gets messed up, I'll know which one goes with which. I'm going to start by working on the 2 circular windows and then the 4 that go on section 4 because they're a little different from the rest of them. So the first thing I'm going to do is ink the little white paper with the spiders on it, and then I'll put some score tape on it, and in each case I'm going to center that decorative paper on the black cardstock. So I'll go ahead and get that accomplished. Now the 2 circular windows are finished, so we can just put them aside. And for these square windows, what we want to do is cut a 1-inch hole in the center. And since these squares measure 1.5 inches on each side, we can just use our ruler and cut a 1/4 inch in on all 4 sides, and that will leave you with a 1-inch hole in the middle. So I'll go ahead and get that accomplished. Once you have all the holes cut out, go ahead and use a marker on the inside of that cut so you can get rid of that white that shows there. And you can ink or not ink as you desire. So I'll do that on all 4 of these windows. And I should say, for any of these, you can prep them with score tape as you go along, or just do the score tape all at the same time at the end. So I'll finish inking these square windows, and then I'll be back for the next set. Next we have 3 windows that are rectangular. Number 1, inset. So this goes section 1, this is the inset window. And then the section 5 window, and this is the bay window for section 7. Now on section 5 you can either make this kind of a window, or what I'm going to do is I cut out a little emblem from my decorative paper that I'm going to put on there instead of a window. But you have your choice, so I'm going to put mine aside. If you're not doing like I am, or you don't want to use some sort of special emblem there, then you will just do that window 5 like I'll show you for windows, the inset window for 1 and the bay window for 7. So we're not going to attach these to the black cardstock to begin with. The first thing we're going to do is cut a 3/16 inch frame out of each one of these decorative papers. 3/16 is a 1/16 less than 1/4 inch. So use your ruler that has the 1/16 guide on there and just cut a frame out that is 3/16 inch on each of the 4 sides. So I'll go ahead and get that accomplished. I just want to show you a little trick I do, or a little tip, not a trick, when I'm cutting these 3/16. First I mark on one of the sides, on the shorter sides usually, the 3/16, so I'll know how long to make the long cuts. And then I start with the long cut side. I've already done this side. So I turn it around this way, and I put my 3/16 up next to that edge, and I just start a little bit, maybe go 1/8 inch, and then I put my finger up here, and I'm holding on to both the ruler down here and the paper up here, and then nothing shifts around, and which is really important when you're working on these small pieces of paper. So that's my little tip for cutting these narrow strips. So now I have my 2 little frames cut out. I inked around the inside and outside edges, and then I prepped them to attach with 1/8 inch wide score tape. And then these will just get attached. They are exactly the same size on the outside as our pieces of black cardstock. So go ahead and attach those frames to the black cardstock. And once you have the frames attached to the black cardstock, we're going to again cut a hole in the center. This time we will line up our ruler on the 1/4 inch line and go all the way around. And this will end up giving us a frame that has a 1/16 inch black reveal on the inside. So I'll do that to both of these. So here are the 2 frames I made, and when I cut out that center, I cut out the part that had the section number on, so I made sure to write that on each one of these. And then here is my window 5 that I just attached the emblem to, and you may have made a similar window frame and have a window frame for this one. So either way. And we'll just put these aside. On any that we have the window frames, we will eventually put some center paper on those. Next we have 4 pieces that are sized exactly the same. They are 1 7/8 wide by 2 1/8 tall. 2 go on section 1. One of these is the regular dormer, and one is the inset dormer, and then there are 2 dormers on section 3. But all of these get done the same way. The first thing we'll do is just put our cardstock aside. And then on each one of these, we want to cut a gable end. We will measure down a 1/2 inch on both sides, find our center point, and cut off those triangles. So measure down a 1/2 inch on each side, center point, cut off the 2 gable triangles. Next we'll cut a 3/16 inch frame, similar to how we did for the rectangular ones. This time we just have to cut it along the gable edge as well. This is an example of what it will look like. And so just take your ruler and go around each side, leaving 3/16, and use that little tip I showed you about holding onto the paper so that it doesn't get away from you. Once you have all the little frames cut out, go ahead and ink them if you're into inking. And then I've prepped all of these with 1/8 inch score tape on the back. And then we'll line them up with the bottom and 2 edges of our black cardstock. And then you can either use scissors or craft knife and cut off the gable ends up here at the top so that the cardstock shape matches the frame. And then once you've done that, again we'll cut our 1/4 inch in around all of these edges so that we'll have that nice little black reveal of a 1/16 of an inch inside. So I'll repeat that for all of the remaining dormer windows here. So there are the 4 little dormers. And then we can move on and do our last dormer that's a little bit bigger. This one we want to find a center point, and then on the 2 sides we'll measure down 3/4 of an inch. 3/4 of an inch on the 2 sides, find the center point and cut the gable. Now the process is the same. First cut the 3/16 of an inch frame around the pattern paper, ink it, attach score tape, and put it on the piece of black cardstock, and then cut a 1/4 inch frame from the black cardstock. So it's the same as the little ones, it's just that it's a bigger size. Now here are all my little window frames. You may have an 1/8 one if you did not use a decorative element. You would have an 1/8 frame here. So the next thing to do for all of the frames is to prep them for their center paper by putting 1/4 inch score tape around all of the edges. This is the paper I've selected to go inside of my frames, And I will tell you, it will be a tight fit to get the 7 centers out of this one piece of paper. Now, if you have 8 frames, if you created a window instead of using this element, you will not be able to get all of the centers out of one 6x6. So there are other options in the paper pad that you can use, or else for this one window, which sits in a different place, you could use a different black paper. There's some that has just very faint writing on it. I don't know if you can see that. I can barely see it. You could use that paper for this element, or there are 2 sheets of this paper. You could use this paper for everything. But in my case, I only have 7 windows, so I'm going to use this piece, and I'm going to tell you how to cut it so you can get all 7 out of one piece. Now this is a directional paper, and so we have to be careful of that. And I'm going to start out by getting rid of this little border strip on the top, and then I'm going to cut a strip lengthwise on the paper that is 1 7/8 inch wide. 1 7/8 inch wide. So I'll do that. Now from this strip, I'm going to cut one that is 2 inches tall and one that is 2 1/8 inches tall. And then from this little leftover square, I'm going to cut a strip that is 1 3/8 inches wide by the entire length. This is my leftover from cutting the first long piece. I'm going to cut another piece lengthwise that is 1 7/8 inches wide. 1 7/8 inches wide. From this piece, I'm going to cut one that is 2 1/8 inches tall and one that is 2 3/8. 2 1/8 and 2 3/8. Now I'm left with a strip that is 2 1/4 inches wide, and I'll cut a piece that is 2 7/8. 2 7/8. Now I have one piece left over, and I just need a frame for this last one that is 1 7/8 wide by 2 1/8 tall. 1 7/8 wide by 2 1/8 tall. Now you can find all of these measurements down here under the pattern paper. The last 3, they say only cut from trim paper, so you only need the centers for the ones up above. And remember, and I'll put a note in here for number 5, that if you're going to use an emblem, you don't need any trim paper for that. But the 2 that we had to cut a little bit different from the frame, the trim paper, are right here. It says cut center paper 1 7/8 by 2. Remember, there's one of those that's cut a little short. And then for the large dormer, its actual width is 2 3/8, and we cut it at 2 1/4. That will be fine, but it's just a little bit short. So, and a note at the bottom says these adjustments only need to be made if you only have a 6x6 center paper. So now what we want to do is just attach this paper to the back of each one. And you can take your black marker probably before you do it, and so you won't see any of this white edge on there. And then for the 2 that are cut just a little bit shy, just center it, and there'll be plenty of paper. And on the same thing for this big one, you'll just center it left and right, and then trim off the gables on any of the ones with gables. When you have all of your little windows completed, go ahead and prep the backs with score tape so you'll be ready to attach them in place. Now that we have our windows made, we can finish off our dormers, and I'm going to start with the 2 that go on section 3 because they're the simplest. They're the ones that are just double thickness of chipboard. and we'll just remove the score tape backing from one of our little windows and center it on each one of those two. So I'll go ahead and accomplish that. Next I'll work on the dormer for section 1. This is the one that has an 1/8 of an inch piece of chipboard to form the sides. So I'll put that down, and I'll take my third window and put that right on top of that one. Then to finish off these edges, I'm going to cut a 6-inch strip that is 1/8 inch wide from my little spider paper. I won't try to put distress ink on the edges because it's just too skinny, but I will run my black marker, as you can see I'm doing here, along the edges. And then I'll back that with a piece of 1/8 inch score tape. Now I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to put it on my craft mat so I have it 6 inches here, and then I will center my little dormer so I can see where that would be on there. And I'm going to just center this strip on the bottom of the dormer. So just center it on the bottom of the dormer. Once I have that attached on the bottom, I'm just going to bring it up on the two sides. And I'll just stick the ends inside of the ridge line. Give that a good burnish with your bone folder. Now this is the gable that goes on section 6. It's about 3/8 of an inch wide here. And this is the one where the large window goes on the front. So I'll go ahead and put that on. Then I'll cut a strip that is 3/8 of an inch wide by 6 inches long of my little spidery paper. And then I'll hold it on the edge and mark where that angle is at the bottom. There's an angle here. And cut that off so it's a 1/16 of an inch short. I'll ink the edges and put some score tape on it and fit that on that side, and repeat that process for the other side. And that's the little dormer for section 6. And for section 7, the bay window, we need to do a little bit more to this one. We have some edges that aren't very pretty here, these vertical edges. So I'll just take one of my joining strips and turn it inside out, just like we did before for the extension. And I'm just going to fit and clean up those 4 vertical edges with some of this finishing strip. Now I have my finishing strips on all 4 edges, so I can take my little window and attach it centered in the front. Then we can measure the width of the sides. That one is 7/8. They're both 7/8. So I'm going to cut a 6-inch strip of paper that is 3/4 of an inch wide. This is my 3/4 inch wide strip that I will hold up from the bottom square edge, a 1/16 of an inch. And you can put that on with repositionable tape if you want to, and then mark that angle on the inside. And we can cut it 1/16 inch shy of that, ink this strip and put some score tape on it, and put that on the side, and repeat for the other side. And that completes the paper and the windows for the dormers. For the door, I'm going to use this paper with the little skull and crossbones behind the frame, and then I decided I wanted to add just a little orange highlight to the frame itself. So I cut a piece of orange paper that is 1 5/8 inch wide by 3 1/2 inches tall. 1 5/8 by 3.5, and I'm going to center that left and right. We should see about a 1/16 of an inch on either side, and then I'll trace that top. So actually what I did was I just used my craft knife right up against those two gable edges and carefully trim that off. And then I can trim 1/8 of an inch off the bottom of this. Once I've cut that 1/8 of an inch off the bottom, I'll take some 1/8 inch score tape and go on the back side exactly around all 4 of the edges. You don't have to go on the bottom. That 1/8 inch score tape preps the edge and also gives some support while you're cutting this out, but it will make it a little slippery, so make sure you hold on to it. Use the little tip of putting your finger on when you cut that out. So you're going to cut right on the inside edge of that score tape. And you can actually put your ruler on the inside on the paper so it won't be quite so slippery. Then you have a little highlight here that you can either ink or at least take your black marker around the edges. And then that piece will get centered. I like to start from this top corner and work my way down. And then I'm just going to pick a spot on my paper so that I can get the little skull and crossbones centered and have a nice distribution up and down, and then I'm going to cut that out even with the edge of the frame and then straight across the bottom. It should be 1 3/4 wide. So I cut off about 1/8 of an inch off the left hand side of the paper, then cut my 1 3/4 rectangle, and now I can put that on here and attach it to put some score tape on the back of my frame, attach this on, and then I can just use my craft knife to take off the gable end. And there's our door. So for our little steps, we're going to start out by covering them with some black cardstock, and there's a strip of paper listed in the cutting guide that is 2 inches by 5 1/8, and we're going to do some scoring. We'll start out at 1/2 inch, 1/2, and then 1 1/4, 1 1/4, 1 3/4, 1 3/4, 2 1/4, 2 1/4, 2 3/4, 2 3/4, 3, 3, and finally 4 5/8. 4 5/8. Then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to score at 1 1/2, 1 1/2, 2, 2, and the last score is at 2 1/2. And these scores should be reminiscent of what we did when we created the little steps. It's a little bit different since our paper has an overlap to it. Now you can use the edge of your table if it's sharp. I'm just using one of my steel blocks, and I'm going to start with a series of scores that we made on the first side, and I'm going to bend them and then I'll reinforce them with my bone folder. So the first 2, then we'll skip one, we'll skip another one, skip another one, and then we'll do the last 2. There's one right here at a 1/4 inch away from the last one I did, and then one at the end. And I'm going to reinforce those with my bone folder. And then I'll flip it over to the other side, It's the third score that we start on, and then we skip one, do the next one, skip one, do the next one. And I'll reinforce those 3 with my bone folder. So now we should have a little set of accordions to go down the steps and form a round. So this one starts a 1/2 inch down on the back, and then it comes down all the steps, wraps around, and comes up a 1/2 inch on the back again, so that we have a nice little finish to our steps. So now we're ready to attach these and put some score tape on, and I'll figure it out, and then I'll be back to tell you what the plan is. So the score tape is on the 2 last tabs for sure, and then on the large section that's going on the bottom, I put a wider strip on either end of that, and I put some little 1/8 inch on the end of that. And then on the side that is on the top, the stoop, I put some 1/8 inch around those sides. And then on all the step parts, I just alternated every other one, and it's on the part that you would step on if you were actually stepping on the steps. So that's how I did it, and feel free to figure out a better system and just undo this backing and fit that neatly around. So there are the little steps with the black cardstock on them. And then to add a decorative element to them, I've cut a piece of decorative paper. This is the last little scrap of this tiny orange check, and it's 1 7/8 inch wide by 2 3/8. 1 7/8 by 2 3/8. And we'll do some scoring. On the outside, we'll score at 5/8, 5/8, and then 1 1/8, 1 5/8, and 2 1/8. And then flip it over to the back side and score at 7/8, 1 3/8, and 1 7/8. So we'll reinforce these creases. I'm starting at the 5/8 inch side, and I'm going to do the first one facing down. Then I'm going to skip one, do the next one, skip one, do the next one, skip one, and do the last one. And I'll reinforce those with my bone folder. Then I'm going to flip it over and do the 3 that we scored from the opposite side. And I'll reinforce those with my bone folder. So that is the scoring for our little steps. Now if you want to have the illusion that there are separate pieces of paper on these steps, you could take your black marker, and on the 3 innies in that crease in the inside of the step there, you could take your black magic marker and make a line right in the middle of that crease. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So now I'm ready to install my steps, and I'm going to put score tape on the first section and the bottom section, and then I'll put it on the decorative paper on the 3 sides that are the flats of the steps. And there are the steps with their decorative paper.